In the dead of 1943, a German U-boat slipped beneath the Atlantic, vanishing without a trace. Months passed, its fate unknown. Then, against all odds, the same submarine surfaced in the remote rivers of Argentina, a ghost from Europe, carrying secrets that could rewrite the history of the war. The Atlantic in 1943 was a war zone unlike any other, a vast expanse of churning grey waves where the hunter and the hunted danced a deadly game. German U-boats prowled the supply lines that stretched from North America to Britain, each vessel a shadow in the fog, each captain a chess player with lives and strategy hanging in the balance. Convoys of merchant ships, laden with food, fuel, and munitions, carved precarious paths through these waters, their fate often sealed before the first periscope broke the horizon. Among the Kriegsmarine's fleet was U-530, a Type IXC-40 submarine, larger and more formidable than its Type 7 counterparts. Commanded by Kapitanleutnant Otto Wermuth, a seasoned officer whose reputation for precise planning was matched only by his quiet intensity, the U-boat represented both a weapon of war and a symbol of Germany's desperate reach across the Atlantic. Her crew, a blend of veterans hardened by patrols and young sailors thrust into the maw of global conflict, carried the weight of duty and fear in equal measure. Days and nights blurred together in the cramped steel hull, where diesel fumes mingled with the salty breath of the ocean, and every sonar ping was a heartbeat of anticipation. Training for these missions was rigorous, but nothing could fully prepare a man for the psychological toll of extended patrols beneath the waves. Hours were spent in tense silence, listening to the distant rumble of Allied convoys or the terrifying percussion of depth charges exploding somewhere in the distance. Food was rationed, the air stale, and privacy non-existent. Men learned quickly to navigate both the machinery of the U-boat and the fragile bonds of camaraderie, knowing that any mistake could be fatal, not just for themselves, but for the hundreds depending on them above the waves. U-530's final known mission began in late 1943, tasked with escorting supply convoys and striking at Allied shipping lanes. Intelligence records later reconstructed her route, a ghostly thread through the North Atlantic, shadowing convoys, diving deep to evade detection, and surfacing under the cover of darkness. Wermuth's log, fragmentary as it is, hints at the precision with which he maneuvered, the constant calculations of speed, depth, and torpedo range that defined life aboard the boat. But then, somewhere off the coast of South America, the trail went cold. The last radio transmissions were routine, almost mundane, positional reports, confirmation of mission progress, a final acknowledgement of orders. No SOS, no sign of mechanical failure, nothing to explain the disappearance that would soon captivate Allied intelligence. Allied patrols scoured the Atlantic, planes cutting through clouds, destroyers slicing through the waves with sonar scanning for even the faintest echo of a U-boat hull. Every sighting proved false, every signal led to dead ends. For months, U-530 simply vanished, leaving thousands of lives and tons of material at risk, and a vacuum of questions in its wake. Inside the U-boat, the human experience was immediate and relentless. The stifling heat, the metallic tang of fuel, the low hum of the electric motors beneath their feet. Each crewman knew the stakes, the fragile line between hunter and prey. Yet history would remember little of their final hours. Instead, U-530 became a phantom, a silent enigma lurking in the abyss, a vessel that existed in logs and rumors but evaded the cold scrutiny of radar and code breaking. As the months stretched on, Germany offered no answers, and the Allies could only speculate. The ocean kept its secrets, the Atlantic claimed its prize, and a mystery was born, one that would haunt naval historians and intelligence officers alike. U-530 had disappeared, swallowed by the vast expanse of war, leaving behind questions as deep and dark as the waters she once ruled. The Atlantic was no longer just a battlefield of ships and submarines. It had become a theater of shadows, where intelligence and deception were as lethal as torpedoes. By 1944, German U-boats had established themselves as strategic predators, their mission clear: sever the lifeline between North America and Europe. Every convoy they sank carried not just cargo, but hope and survival for a continent at war. A single submarine, lurking beneath the waves, could turn the tide of supply, forcing the Allies to reroute convoys, dispatch destroyers, and expend resources that could have supported frontline operations. U-530, lost to the Atlantic's depths, represented more than a missing vessel. It was a silent threat, a phantom capable of striking unseen. The Kriegsmarine relied on the precision of their codes, the infamous Enigma machine, to orchestrate these operations. Every order transmitted, every route plotted, was encrypted in a cipher that Allied cryptanalysts had been desperate to break. Bletchley Park, the nerve centre of British code-breaking, worked tirelessly to unravel patterns, intercept communications, and predict U-boat movements. Every decoded message could save lives, or condemn them. Allied intelligence pored over maps, convoy schedules, and intercepted signals, trying to anticipate where a missing U-boat might appear. For U-530, no hint appeared in the logs, no trail left behind, a complete and unnerving silence. Naval commanders coordinated searches with painstaking care. Admiral Sir Max Horton, commander of the western approaches, ordered destroyers, corvettes, and patrol aircraft to sweep the waters from the Caribbean to the South Atlantic. Analysts considered every possibility. Could she have been sunk by mechanical failure, or depth charges gone awry? Could she have taken an unexpected route, hugging the coastlines of neutral countries? Rumors began to circulate, whispers among Allied officers that some U-boats were slipping into ports in South America, unnoticed, a strategy long feared but never confirmed. It was a nerve-wracking, high-stakes puzzle, each missing piece a potential disaster. Inside the steel hull of U-530, the human reality was as intense as the strategic chessboard above. Days blurred into nights, the hum of electric motors and diesel engines the only markers of time. Fatigue gnawed at men's focus. Fear lingered in every shadowed corner, sharpened by the constant awareness that a single error could be fatal. Decisions by Kapitanleutnant Wermuth weighed heavily, not just torpedo calculations and depth maneuvers, but the moral strain of survival. Submarine life was claustrophobic, air thick with diesel and sweat, and every crewman bore the silent tension of proximity and peril. Leadership mattered, discipline was life, and every human heartbeat beneath the waves became both a risk and a responsibility. Meanwhile, the macro stakes in Europe intensified. Allied bombers tore into German cities, oil refineries, and factories. Hitler's directives pressured the Kriegsmarine to strike with increasing aggression, even as losses mounted. Every U-boat mission carried not only tactical objectives but the broader weight of strategic desperation. Losses in the Atlantic could not be tolerated, yet every success came at an escalating human and material cost. The disappearance of U-530 became a symbol of both peril and uncertainty, a reminder that in this war, even the vast oceans could be traversed by ghosts. Then, a faint signal cut through the darkness. Fragmentary, almost imperceptible, it hinted that U-530 might have found her way across the Atlantic, perhaps into a port in neutral South America. It was not confirmation, just a shadow, a thread of possibility that sent ripples through Allied intelligence. Plans were redrawn, searches widened, but the Atlantic remained vast, and the mystery deepened. U-530 had vanished, but the world could feel her presence in every convoy routed, every strategy adjusted, every anxious watch on the horizon. The hunter had become a shadow, and the shadow was moving. U-530's voyage across the Atlantic was a journey that defied expectation, a 1,000-kilometer odyssey through a war zone teeming with enemy vessels and watchful patrols. From her last known location in the North Atlantic, the submarine charted a course southward, skirting the shipping lanes of Allied convoys and exploiting the vast emptiness of the open ocean. Every sonar ping, every distant echo of a destroyer's hull, was a reminder that detection meant almost certain destruction. Yet, for weeks, she moved undetected, a ghost beneath the waves, her presence known only to the men within her steel hull. Life aboard U-530 during this transit was an exercise in endurance and ingenuity. Fuel was rationed meticulously, each engine burn calculated to the kilometer. The Type IXC-40 had an extended range compared to other U-boats, yet the Atlantic's expanse tested every reserve. Food became a scarcity, rationed to maintain both health and morale. Freshwater was limited. The distillation apparatus worked tirelessly, producing barely enough to quench thirst and sustain life. Engine maintenance was relentless. Diesel motors and electric systems demanded constant attention, every bolt and gasket a matter of survival. A single mechanical failure could strand the submarine in open water, vulnerable and defenseless. Amid these physical challenges, moral tension simmered among the crew. Months of isolation, relentless stress, and the unknown weighed heavily. Some questioned the wisdom of continuing a secret mission, while others contemplated surrender, knowing the Allies would likely treat any crew that surfaced in neutral waters with cautious mercy. Every decision rested on Wermuth's shoulders, the balance between duty, orders, and the preservation of human life. The weight of command in a vessel where mistakes could mean death was a constant, invisible pressure. As U-530 approached the South Atlantic, the political landscape shifted. Argentina, officially neutral, maintained a complex relationship with both Axis and Allied powers. Buenos Aires harbored sympathies toward Germany, and clandestine operations in remote harbors allowed for the occasional discreet visit from foreign vessels. Argentine naval patrols, vigilant yet wary, were the first to report unusual activity: a submarine surfacing under cover of night, a vessel moving cautiously along their maritime perimeter. Confusion reigned. Was this a defecting German crew, an Axis mission, or simply a phantom sighting? The patrols approached cautiously, weapons ready, but orders to avoid provocation held firm. Back in Allied command centers, initial reports of U-530's presence in South American waters were dismissed as rumor. The vast distances, the lack of confirmed sightings, and the improbability of a U-boat reaching a neutral harbor without interception rendered the claims almost fantastical. Yet, later investigations and historian analysis would confirm the vessel's extraordinary navigation and evasion tactics, hinting at the possibility of secret German evacuation plans or intelligence operations extending to the hemisphere's southern reaches. For the crew, relief was mingled with apprehension. Months spent under the crushing weight of the Atlantic had hardened nerves, yet the sight of land, or at least a coastline they could trust, brought a tension all its own. Survival did not erase fear, it transformed it. Every officer and sailor carried memories of convoys lost, friends gone, and the constant reminder that the ocean was an unforgiving witness. The first approach to port was tentative. Argentine officers monitored the vessel from a distance, signaling instructions, confirming compliance. U-530 responded, moving slowly, the periscope cutting the water like a silent herald of her arrival. The world was unprepared for what this submarine carried, not in cargo alone, but in the implications of her existence. The Atlantic had delivered her across thousands of kilometers, and she emerged from the shadows not merely as a survivor, but as a vessel that would ignite speculation, intrigue, and a global intelligence mystery. In July 1945, months after Germany had formally surrendered, the quiet Argentine port of Mar del Plata was shaken by an event few could have anticipated. Out of the Atlantic's vast darkness emerged U-530, her hull scarred by months of evasion, her crew gaunt from prolonged patrols. The war in Europe was over, yet here, on the southern tip of the Americas, the Atlantic still held secrets. The arrival of a German U-boat at a neutral harbor, so long after hostilities had ceased, immediately ignited suspicion and intrigue. Argentina, under President Edelmiro Julian Farrell, had maintained an official stance of neutrality during the conflict, though whispers of sympathies toward the Axis were never far from political discourse. The Argentine Navy, tasked with maintaining order, moved cautiously. Officers approached the submarine, weapons at the ready, while naval intelligence prepared to interrogate the crew and inspect the vessel. The implications were immense. A single U-boat could carry escaped Nazi officials, gold reserves looted from the Rye, sensitive intelligence, or even experimental technologies. Every officer aboard became a living enigma, every sealed compartment a potential Pandora's box. The historical backdrop only deepened the tension. Europe was still reeling from the aftermath of war. Rumors of high-ranking Nazis fleeing justice circulated widely. Adolf Hitler dead, Martin Bormann vanished, and other officials suspected of escaping to South America. International attention turned toward neutral ports, and Argentina, with its long coastline and strategic harbors, was a natural focus. For the Allies, the notion of a U-boat arriving so late, after months of untraceable transit, raised alarms. How had the vessel eluded Allied patrols across the Atlantic? What had she carried? Inside U-530, the human drama unfolded in silence. The crew, disciplined and wary, now faced interrogation under the watchful eyes of both Argentine authorities and international observers. Fear and relief coexisted, relief for survival, fear of scrutiny and consequence. Every step from the gangway to the dock was laden with suspicion. Journalists, diplomats, and naval officers swarmed the port, eager for answers, but the submarine's hull offered no hints. Her cargo, her orders, and the precise reasoning behind her extraordinary voyage remained locked behind steel doors and cryptic logbooks. Speculation ran rampant. Argentine authorities inspected every compartment, while Allied intelligence in Buenos Aires demanded reports. Could the U-boat have carried escaped Nazi officers seeking refuge? Was there gold, hidden documents, or technology that could shift post-war calculations? Newspapers published every whisper, fueling public fascination. Yet official accounts were frustratingly ambiguous. Conflicting testimonies from crew members, partially classified Argentine documents, and missing Kriegsmarine records created a haze of uncertainty that would endure for decades. The international reaction was equally charged. Allied commanders expressed disbelief and concern. A vessel that had traversed thousands of kilometers of hostile waters, arriving unannounced months after the war's end, was not merely a curiosity, it was a potential intelligence disaster. Reports were circulated between London, Washington, and Buenos Aires, each office seeking to confirm or debunk the rumors. The stakes were high. One misstep could have sparked diplomatic tensions or exposed unanticipated post-war operations. Then, as the world watched, Kapitanleutnant Otto Wermuth stepped forward. His explanation was brief and carefully measured, offering nothing that would definitively clarify the vessel's voyage or cargo. The statement raised more questions than it answered, a deliberate veil over a journey that had already become legendary. Observers left the port with unease, journalists filed reports filled with speculation, historians would later sift through fragmentary evidence, and the U-boat's crew became permanent figures in one of WWI's most enduring mysteries. U-530, once a shadow in the Atlantic, now loomed large in the post-war imagination. The world was unprepared for the implications of her arrival, and the Atlantic secrets had not yet surrendered all their truths. As Argentina held its breath, and the Allies scrambled to understand, one thing was clear: the story of U-530 was far from over, and the ocean had delayed the arrival of U-530 in Mar del Plata did more than mark the end of a perilous journey across the Atlantic. It ignited a diplomatic and historical tempest. Argentina, a nation striving to maintain neutrality while quietly accommodating the complex currents of post-war politics, now faced intense scrutiny. Harboring a German military vessel months after the European conflict had ended was no small matter. Diplomats in Buenos Aires worked feverishly behind closed doors, balancing the demands of Allied powers against the sensitive internal politics of a country whose sympathies toward Axis elements were widely suspected. Every decision carried the potential for international fallout. The crew of U-530 underwent exhaustive debriefings, their statements catalogued and compared by Argentine authorities and visiting Allied officers. Logs were inspected, compartments searched, yet answers remained frustratingly partial. Some officers offered fragments of explanation, describing mechanical failures or navigational decisions, but others remained silent, their evasions feeding the ever-growing swirl of speculation. Classified cables, partially destroyed records, and conflicting testimonies created a veil of ambiguity, one that would fuel historians' investigations for decades. The public reaction was immediate and intense. Newspapers across the Americas splashed headlines with tales of a ghostly submarine, its mysterious cargo, and the men who had crossed thousands of kilometers of war-torn seas undetected. Editors debated the plausibility of high-ranking Nazis escaping through secret U-boat routes. Conspiracy theorists painted the arrival as evidence of hidden post-war operations, secret evacuations, and clandestine networks stretching to South America. Academics and naval historians would later scrutinize these accounts, parsing the lines between verified intelligence and rumor, always mindful of the broader strategic context. For the crew themselves, the end of their odyssey offered no relief. Months of life in the confined steel hull, constant threat of detection, and the weight of survival had left psychological scars. Many were haunted by the loss of comrades, the torpedoed convoys they had attacked, and the moral ambiguities of serving in a conflict that had ended while they were still at sea. Survival carried its own burden: guilt, fear, and the persistent awareness that the world outside had moved on, leaving their deeds suspended in secrecy. In the decades that followed, researchers and historians meticulously traced U-530's route, compared naval logs, and analyzed declassified intelligence reports. Every fragment of evidence, every obscure document, offered tantalizing insight into the extraordinary voyage. Yet even with decades of scrutiny, uncertainty remained. The submarine had left behind a trail of questions as deep and inscrutable as the waters she had crossed, a ghost of war that refused to be fully catalogued or explained. U-530 became more than a vessel. It became a symbol of endurance, secrecy, and the enduring mysteries of World War II. The echoes of her passage reached far beyond Mar del Plata, reminding the world that in war, and in its aftermath, the shadows often carry stories that history may never fully illuminate. U-530's story is more than a tale of a single submarine. It is a lens through which the complexities of World War II naval warfare can be understood. The Atlantic, a vast and perilous theater, demanded both courage and ingenuity from those who patrolled its depths. Submarines like U-530 were instruments of strategy and symbols of survival, blending technological sophistication with human endurance. They could alter supply lines, disrupt entire campaigns, and, as history would reveal, leave behind questions that decades of scholarship have yet to fully resolve. The paradox of U-530 lies in its duality. It embodies bravery and fear, discipline and desperation, secrecy, and suspicion. The men aboard endured claustrophobic months beneath the waves, navigating both physical dangers and the psychological strain of isolation, yet they emerged to a world eager to doubt, to speculate, to assign motives beyond those recorded in naval logs. Their survival was at once a testament to seamanship and a catalyst for intrigue that would shadow them, and historians, for generations. Questions remain as persistent as the ocean currents that carried her. Who, if anyone, disembarked under clandestine orders? What, if anything, did she transport across thousands of kilometers of hostile waters? Argentina's role in accommodating a foreign military vessel, the veiled diplomacy, and the partial records left behind have become enduring puzzles. Scholars continue to sift through fragments, naval dispatches, declassified intelligence reports, and testimonies that hint at secret escape routes, strategic calculations, and the murky interplay of post-war geopolitics. Yet, beyond strategy and secrecy, U-530's story is profoundly human. Families of the crew wrestled with silence and uncertainty. Allied forces, once a hunters, remained fascinated by a submarine that had defied the odds. Historians, decades later, find themselves drawn not just to her hull and logs, but to the human experiences, fear, duty, resilience, etched into every compartment of steel. The vessel becomes a mirror of wartime morality, survival, and endurance, reminding us that history is both recorded in documents and lived through the minds and bodies of those who endured it. And so, U-530 lingers in memory as both mystery and monument. Against the Argentine sunset, her silhouette recalls the quiet endurance of a submarine that traversed oceans, survived battles, and emerged into uncertainty. Beneath the waves and beyond the pages of history, she continues to evoke awe, reflection, and the enduring moral ambiguity of war, a ghost of the Atlantic whose echoes remain vivid across the decades. Even decades after her voyage, U-530 continues to haunt the historical record. Scholars, naval historians, and conspiracy theorists alike remain captivated by her disappearance, her transit across the Atlantic, and her unexpected arrival in Argentina months after the war in Europe had ended. Fragmented reports, missing logbooks, and partial testimonies ensure that the vessel's story is never fully settled, leaving a shadow of uncertainty that stretches across time. The submarine embodies the paradoxes of war: courage and fear, discipline and desperation, duty and moral ambiguity. Her crew endured isolation, relentless danger, and the psychological weight of decisions that could mean life or death, not just for themselves, but for the countless sailors and civilians affected by their patrols. Yet the human cost of survival, and the choices made in silence beneath the waves, remain as much a part of the story as strategy or geopolitics. U-530 also offers lessons in secrecy and consequence. Her journey reminds us that warfare is not only fought in open battle, but in shadows, through intelligence, deception, and the hidden roots that influence both immediate outcomes and long-term historical memory. The Atlantic kept her secrets, and in doing so, left a legacy of questions that continue to intrigue and challenge historians. In the end, the submarine is more than a vessel. She is a symbol of human endurance, the moral complexity of conflict, and the ocean's capacity to preserve mystery. As the sun sets over the Argentine coast, one can imagine her silhouette still beneath the waves, a silent witness to the strategies, fears, and choices that shaped a world at war. U-530's story does not simply conclude. It echoes, reminding us that history is as much about what we uncover as it is about what remains hidden.